Dawn breaks over the Eurotas Valley, painting the peaks of Mount Taygetus in shades of gold and crimson. Here, in the heart of Laconia, where the morning mist rises from fertile plains surrounded by protective mountains, lies the birthplace of history's most extraordinary warrior society. The river flows quietly through ancient olive groves and fields, where shepherds tend their flocks. Yet this peaceful scene conceals secrets that would reshape the ancient world and haunt human imagination for millennia to come. Picture yourself standing on these wind-swept hills in the centuries before the Common Era, watching the sun illuminate a landscape that seems blessed by the gods themselves. The valley stretches before you, protected on all sides by natural barriers that create a world apart from the rest of Greece. To the west, the towering Taygetus range forms an almost impregnable wall. To the east, Mount Panon stands guard over approaches from the sea. Here, in this isolated sanctuary, a people will forge themselves into something unprecedented in human history. This is Sparta, though not yet the Sparta of legend. Not yet the place where boys learn that returning with their shields or upon them represents the only acceptable outcomes of battle. Not yet the society where mothers bid farewell to sons with words that will echo through history. Come back with your shield or on it. That transformation lies ahead, born from choices that will elevate human discipline to heights never before achieved, while extracting prices that few societies would willingly pay. The Spartans who will emerge from this valley represent more than another Greek city-state seeking wealth and expansion. They become something unique in the annals of civilization, a people who consciously choose to subordinate every aspect of human existence to a single consuming purpose. Where other societies balance competing values, prosperity and security, individual desires and communal needs, the pursuit of beauty and the demands of survival, the Spartans will make a different choice. They will choose perfection in war above all else, and pay any price to achieve it. What drives human beings to attempt such transformation? What circumstances lead a society to conclude that only through the most rigorous discipline, the most complete sacrifice of individual comfort, the most systematic cultivation of martial virtue, can they secure their survival and achieve their destiny? The story that unfolds in this valley over the coming centuries provides one of history's most compelling attempts to answer these eternal questions. As you drift toward contemplation of this remarkable journey, consider what the Spartans represent in the larger story of human civilization. They stand as both inspiration and warning, demonstrating what becomes possible when a people commit themselves entirely to an ideal, while revealing the terrible costs such commitment demands. Their society produces warriors whose courage becomes legendary, women whose strength amazes the ancient world, and a political system that endures for centuries through its very inflexibility. Yet beneath this achievement lies a darker current. The pursuit of perfection requires not just the willing sacrifice of those who benefit from the system, but the exploitation of those who do not. The creation of superior warriors demands the subordination of an entire population whose only crime is military defeat. The maintenance of equality among citizens necessitates the absolute exclusion of all others from the privileges of citizenship. The Spartans become masters of contradiction. They create the freest citizens in Greece by establishing the most regimented society the world has ever seen. They produce the most formidable warriors of their age by eliminating every aspect of life that does not contribute to military effectiveness. They achieve immortal fame by choosing a way of life that ultimately destroys them. Their story unfolds like a great tragedy in which the protagonist's greatest strengths become the instruments of their destruction. The very qualities that raise Sparta to unparalleled heights: discipline, sacrifice, unwavering commitment to martial excellence, eventually prove incompatible with the flexibility and adaptation that survival in a changing world requires. This valley has witnessed the rise and fall of many peoples, but none whose legacy burns as brightly in human memory as the Spartans. Their influence extends far beyond the military sphere, touching philosophy and politics, education and literature, inspiring admiration and revulsion in equal measure across the centuries. They pose questions that every society must answer. What price are we willing to pay for security? How much individual freedom should be sacrificed for collective strength? When does the pursuit of excellence become the worship of an ideal that consumes those who serve it? The sun climbs higher over Laconia, illuminating a landscape that appears eternal and unchanging. Yet within these protective mountains, forces are gathering that will create one of history's most fascinating experiments in human organization. The warriors are coming. Their story begins now, in this peaceful valley, with choices that will echo through history until the end of time. The forces gathering in this valley arrive not as conquerors in a single decisive campaign, but as part of a vast migration that reshapes the entire Greek world. From the northern mountains of Greece, through passes carved by ancient glaciers and along routes that generations of their ancestors had traveled, come the Dorians. These are not the refined city dwellers that later ages will imagine, but hardy mountain folk whose iron weapons and disciplined formations give them decisive advantages over the bronze-armed peoples they encounter in the fertile southern lands. The traditional stories speak of Heracles' descendants returning to claim their rightful inheritance in the Peloponnese led by divine command and ancestral right. Yet the reality appears far more complex and gradual. The archaeological evidence suggests not a sudden invasion but a prolonged period of migration and settlement, as Dorian-speaking peoples filter southward over generations, sometimes as conquerors, sometimes as invited allies, occasionally as peaceful settlers seeking new homes in a world disrupted by the collapse of the great Bronze Age civilizations. When these northern peoples reach the Eurotas Valley, they find a land still bearing scars from the catastrophe that had destroyed the Mycenaean palaces centuries earlier. The great citadels lie in ruins, their Linear B archives silent, their trade networks severed, yet the valley itself remains fertile. The mountains still provide protection, and the scattered inhabitants who have survived the chaos offer opportunities for both conflict and accommodation that will shape the emerging Spartan identity. The newcomers who settle in Laconia bring with them institutions that will profoundly influence their descendants' development. Chief among these is their system of dual kingship, a unique arrangement that divides royal authority between two families, the Argeads and the Eurypontids, whose competing claims to legitimacy create a balance of power that prevents either line from achieving absolute dominance. This division of sovereignty, perhaps born from the practical need to accommodate rival claimants during the settlement period, becomes one of the defining characteristics of the Spartan constitution. The early kings whose names survive in later tradition, Agis and Eurypon, founders of the royal houses, and their immediate successors, rule over a society still in formation. These are not yet the Spartans of classical antiquity, bound by elaborate laws and customs that regulate every aspect of existence. Instead, they represent a transitional phase, as Dorian social structures adapt to local conditions while gradually incorporating elements from the pre-existing populations they encounter, and in many cases absorb. The religious landscape of early Sparta reflects this blending of traditions. Apollo Caneus, the Dorian god, who becomes central to Spartan religious life, establishes his worship alongside older deities whose roots reach deep into the soil of Laconia. Artemis Orthia, whose cult will later play a crucial role in the agoge system, begins her association with Spartan youth during these formative centuries. The rituals that develop around these divine figures create sacred calendars that regulate military campaigns, agricultural cycles, and community festivals, weaving religious observance into the fabric of daily life in ways that will persist long after the political structures of early Sparta have been transformed. The social organization of this early period reveals patterns that will echo through later Spartan development, while remaining fundamentally different from the highly regimented system that classical sources describe. The emerging community consists of several distinct groups whose relationships will evolve over the coming centuries. The Dorian settlers, who consider themselves the legitimate heirs of the valley, form the core of what will eventually become the citizen body, yet they are not yet the equals that later Spartan ideology envisions, but rather a collection of families and clans whose status depends on their role in the conquest and settlement, their wealth in land and livestock, and their ability to maintain armed followers. Alongside these dominant families exist the descendants of earlier populations who have accepted Dorian rule rather than fleeing or fighting to the death. Some of these groups maintain significant autonomy, governing their own communities while acknowledging Spartan overlordship. Others find themselves reduced to dependent status, required to provide agricultural labor and military service while being excluded from full participation in the emerging political community. These arrangements, born of practical necessity during the settlement period, establish precedents that will influence the development of the more systematic hierarchies that characterize later Spartan society. The economic foundation of early Sparta rests primarily on agriculture and pastoralism, supplemented by limited craft production and occasional raiding against neighboring communities. The fertile lands of the Eurotas Valley support growing populations of both rulers and ruled, while the mountain pastures provide grazing for the sheep and goats that supply much of the community's protein and raw materials. Trade connections remain limited compared to the extensive networks that had flourished during the Bronze Age, though archaeological evidence suggests that early Sparta maintains contact with other regions through the exchange of pottery, metalwork, and luxury goods. Military organization during this period reflects the transitional nature of early Spartan society. The kings lead warrior bands composed of their personal followers and allied families, employing tactics that combine Dorian traditions with innovations developed through local experience. These forces prove effective in establishing control over the immediate vicinity of their settlements, gradually extending Spartan influence throughout the central Eurotas Valley and into the surrounding hill country. Yet these early military successes represent relatively small-scale operations against scattered opponents, not the systematic campaigns of conquests that will characterize later periods. The gradual expansion of Spartan territory during the 8th century brings the community into contact with more organized opposition, particularly from neighboring peoples who have established their own settlements and political structures in the wake of the Bronze Age collapse. The most significant of these encounters occur with communities in the fertile region of Messenia, west of the Taygetus Mountains, where agricultural wealth and strategic position make conflict virtually inevitable. Yet these early clashes remain limited in scope and duration, lacking the sustained character that will mark the great wars of the following century. Political decision-making in early Sparta operates through a combination of royal authority, aristocratic consultation, and popular assembly that will evolve into the complex constitutional system of later periods. The dual kings exercise leadership in military campaigns and religious ceremonies while sharing power with influential families whose support proves essential for effective governance. An assembly of citizens, probably limited to adult males capable of bearing arms, provides a forum for debate and ratification of major decisions, though the precise procedures and powers of these early institutions remain unclear from the limited evidence that survives. As the 8th century progresses, the foundations laid during this formative period begin to generate pressures that will drive fundamental changes in Spartan society. The growing population requires additional agricultural land to support expanding families and their dependents. The military successes achieved through existing organization and tactics create confidence in the community's ability to undertake larger and more ambitious projects. Most importantly, the social arrangements that had emerged during the settlement period begin to show signs of strain as different groups within the community pursue conflicting interests and competing visions of their collective future. The stage is set for the transformative conflicts that will reshape not only Spartan society but the entire region of Laconia and beyond. The community that has taken root in the Eurotas Valley possesses the military capability, political organization, and economic resources necessary to attempt conquests that will either establish its dominance over surrounding peoples or result in its destruction at the hands of those who refuse to accept Spartan rule. The choice approaching will determine whether these early Spartans remain one community among many in the fragmented landscape of post-Bronze Age Greece, or forge themselves into something unprecedented in the ancient world. The sun sets over the Taygetus Mountains as the 8th century draws to a close, casting long shadows across a valley where momentous decisions await. The warriors who will make those choices have been shaped by generations of migration, settlement, and gradual adaptation to their new homeland. Soon, they will face the test that determines whether their community possesses the unity, determination, and ruthlessness necessary to achieve the dominance their growing ambitions demand. The choice that awaits the Spartans as dawn breaks over the 9th decade of the 8th century requires them to look beyond the familiar peaks of the Taygetus range toward lands that promise both salvation and damnation. To the west, across mountain passes that their shepherds know but their armies have never traversed in force, lies Messenia, a region whose fertile plains and strategic coastline offer solutions to problems that threaten to tear Spartan society apart from within. Yet the decision to seek those solutions through conquest will set in motion forces that transform not only the Spartans themselves but the very nature of Greek civilization. The pressures driving this momentous choice have been building for generations. The population growth that marks successful communities throughout the Greek world has created demands that the Eurotas Valley can no longer satisfy through existing arrangements. Young men who expect to inherit land sufficient to support families and maintain their status as warriors find themselves competing for resources that their father's generation had divided among fewer claimants. The social tensions that result threaten to undermine the unity that has enabled Spartan military success, as aristocratic families pursue conflicting strategies for preserving their positions, while common citizens face the prospect of economic decline that could exclude them from full participation in community life. Messenia beckons as the obvious solution to these mounting difficulties. The region's agricultural wealth, demonstrated by the prosperity of its scattered settlements, could support significant population expansion while providing the economic foundation necessary for larger military forces. Its location, controlling routes between the interior and the Western Sea, offers strategic advantages that could secure Spartan dominance over the entire southwestern Peloponnese. Most temptingly, the political fragmentation that characterizes Messenian society suggests that determined aggression might achieve decisive results before potential opponents can organize effective resistance. The First Messenian War begins, not with a single declaration or dramatic invasion, but through a series of border raids and territorial disputes that escalate into systematic conquest. King Theopompus, leading the Eurypontid royal line, provides the military leadership that transforms opportunistic raiding into sustained campaign. His ability to maintain Spartan forces in the field for extended periods, while coordinating attacks that prevent Messenian communities from supporting each other, demonstrates organizational capabilities that will characterize Spartan warfare for centuries to come. The Messenians who face this assault possess individual courage and local knowledge that enable fierce resistance, yet they lack the political unity necessary to coordinate their defense effectively. Their communities fight as separate entities, each protecting its own territory while hoping that neighbors will somehow halt the Spartan advance before it reaches their own borders. This fragmentation, which might have preserved Messenian independence against less determined attackers, proves fatal when confronted by enemies whose entire society has been organized for military purposes. The war's decisive engagement occurs at the great fortress of Ithome, the mountain stronghold that commands central Messenia and provides refuge for populations fleeing Spartan conquest. Here, the accumulated military innovations that the Spartans have developed during their expansion throughout Laconia face their most severe test. The siege that follows reveals both the strengths and limitations of early Spartan military organization, as their forces demonstrate tactical superiority in open battle while struggling to reduce fortified positions defended by desperate opponents fighting for their homeland's survival. The final collapse of Messenian resistance comes not through dramatic assault, but through the gradual erosion of defender morale as supplies dwindle and hope fades. The fall of Ithome, after years of siege, marks more than military victory. It represents the moment when the Spartans cross a threshold that separates them irrevocably from other Greek communities. The decision they make regarding the treatment of their defeated enemies will define not only their own future, but the character of the society they are creating. Rather than following the conventional practice of enslaving some captives while allowing others to flee, the Spartans make a choice that reveals both practical calculation and dangerous precedent. The conquered Messenians, instead of being sold in distant markets or permitted to seek new homes elsewhere, are bound to the land they have lost and required to provide agricultural labor for their conquerors. This arrangement, born from the Spartan need to maintain agricultural production while maximizing the number of citizens available for military service, creates an entirely new category of human bondage that will haunt both rulers and ruled for centuries to come. The Helot system that emerges from this decision represents more than simple slavery. Unlike chattel slaves who are owned as individuals and can be bought, sold, or freed according to their master's wishes, the Helots become a hereditary class bound to specific territories and assigned to provide fixed portions of agricultural production to Spartan citizens. They retain their family structures, religious practices, and cultural identity while being denied political rights and subjected to systematic supervision designed to prevent rebellion. This arrangement provides the economic foundation that will enable the later development of Spartan military specialization, yet it also creates internal contradictions that will eventually destroy the society it supports. The poetry of Tyrtaeus, composed during and after these campaigns, reveals the psychological transformation that accompanies Spartan military success. His verses, preserved by later generations as expressions of the highest martial ideals, demonstrate how conquest changes not only external circumstances but internal values and self-perception. The themes that dominate his work, the glory of dying for the fatherland, the shame of cowardice, the duty to stand firm in battle regardless of personal cost, reflect a society that has discovered its defining purpose through the experience of systematic warfare. Yet Tyrtaeus also reveals the tensions that success generates within Spartan society. His emphasis on the importance of maintaining unity, his warnings against internal strife, his repeated calls for citizens to remember their common interests, suggest that military victory has not eliminated social conflicts but transformed them into new and potentially more dangerous forms. The wealth flowing from Messenian conquest enables some Spartans to live more luxuriously than their ancestors, creating inequalities that threaten the solidarity essential for continued military effectiveness. The Second Messenian War erupts from Hellid desperation rather than Spartan ambition, as the enslaved population finally attempts to break chains that 2 generations of bondage have only strengthened. The revolt that begins around 60-85 BC demonstrates both the resilience of Messenian identity and the fundamental instability of the system the Spartans have created. Under the leadership of Aristomenes, a figure whose historical reality blends with legendary embellishment in later sources, the Helots transform from agricultural laborers into guerrilla fighters capable of threatening Spartan control throughout the Western territories. Aristomenes represents everything the Spartans fear most about their Helot population. Intelligence, charisma, and intimate knowledge of Spartan weaknesses combined with absolute commitment to ending their domination. His ability to organize sustained resistance, coordinate attacks that exploit Spartan vulnerabilities, and maintain Helot morale despite repeated defeats reveals the depth of resentment that systematic oppression has generated. More dangerously for the Spartans, his success in the early phases of the revolt encourages other subject populations to question whether Spartan power is as invincible as it appears. The war that follows tests Spartan society more severely than any external threat they have previously encountered. Unlike their conquest of independent Messenian communities, this conflict pits them against enemies who possess detailed knowledge of Spartan tactics, intimate familiarity with local terrain, and desperate motivation that makes them willing to accept casualties that would break conventional armies. The Helots fight not for conquest or glory but for liberation, a cause that sustains resistance even when military logic suggests surrender. The Spartan response to this crisis reveals both their military adaptability and the psychological pressures that constant warfare generates. Their tactics evolve to address the challenges of guerrilla warfare, emphasizing mobility and local intelligence while maintaining the disciplined formations that provide their primary advantage in conventional battle. Yet the prolonged nature of the conflict, combined with its proximity to Spartan territory, creates strains within their society that threaten to undermine the unity essential for victory. The resolution of the Second Messenian War comes not through single decisive battle but through systematic campaigns that gradually isolate rebel strongholds while offering limited concessions designed to divide the Helot population. The final suppression of organized resistance marks a turning point in Spartan development, as the community that emerges from this prolonged struggle has been transformed by the experience of nearly losing everything they had gained through earlier conquest. The Helot system that survives this great revolt becomes more systematic, more carefully regulated, and more central to Spartan identity than ever before. The Spartans recognize that their survival depends not only on maintaining military superiority over their subjects, but on creating institutional mechanisms that prevent future rebellions while preserving the economic arrangements that enable their specialization in warfare. The solution they develop will influence every aspect of their society, from education and politics to religion and daily life. As you contemplate this crucial period in Spartan development, Picture the fundamental choice that the Messenian Wars represent in human history. The Spartans could have sought solutions to their problems through trade, colonization, or internal reform, paths that other Greek communities pursue with varying degrees of success. Instead, they choose conquest and systematic oppression, achieving short-term prosperity and security at the cost of creating internal contradictions that will ultimately destroy them. The success of their choice during these critical decades establishes patterns that become impossible to change. The Helot system provides the economic foundation for everything the Spartans will accomplish, yet it also ensures that they can never truly rest, never lower their guard, never permit the kind of cultural and intellectual development that characterizes other Greek cities. They have achieved dominance by creating a society permanently at war with itself, a community that can maintain its identity only through constant vigilance against the very people upon whom its prosperity depends. The patterns established through conquest and the suppression of Helot rebellion create a society living perpetually on the edge of internal collapse, sustained only by military superiority that must be constantly maintained and renewed. As the 7th century unfolds, the Spartans confront a fundamental paradox. Their success has created conditions that threaten to destroy the very unity that made their achievements possible. The wealth flowing from Helot labor enables some citizens to live in luxury while others struggle to maintain the equipment and training necessary for military service. The constant vigilance required to prevent rebellion consumes resources and attention that might otherwise be devoted to broader cultural and economic development. Most dangerously, the inequalities emerging within the citizen body threaten to fragment Spartan society just as effectively as external enemies might accomplish through military defeat. Into this crisis steps a figure whose historical reality remains shrouded in mystery, yet whose influence reshapes Spartan society so completely that his name becomes synonymous with law-giving itself. Lycurgus emerges from the shadows of the 7th century not as a conqueror or military leader but as something far rarer and more precious. A reformer whose vision transcends immediate problems to address the fundamental contradictions threatening his community's survival. Whether he represents a single historical individual, a composite of several reformers, or a legendary embodiment of collective transformation matters less than the extraordinary changes attributed to his influence. The traditional accounts describe Lycurgus as a member of one of the royal families who witnesses firsthand the internal conflicts that success has generated within Spartan society. His travels beyond Laconia, particularly his alleged visits to Crete and other regions where distinctive political arrangements have evolved, provide him with alternative models for organizing community life. Yet the solutions he eventually proposes presents mere imitation of external examples, representing instead a systematic attempt to eliminate the sources of conflict that threaten to tear Spartan society apart from within. The Great Retra, the constitutional document that bears Lycurgus's name and authority, represents one of the earliest attempts in Greek history to codify fundamental political arrangements in written form. This document, preserved in later sources though its original text remains disputed, establishes the institutional framework that will govern Spartan society for centuries to come. Its provisions reveal sophisticated understanding of how power can be distributed among competing groups while maintaining the unity essential for effective governance. The Retra's most revolutionary innovation lies in its systematic limitation of royal authority through the creation of institutions that can check and balance monarchical power. The Gerousia, a council of elders composed of men over 60 years of age, receives authority to deliberate on major policy questions before they are presented to the citizen assembly. This body, combining representatives from both royal families with elected members chosen for their wisdom and experience, ensures that important decisions reflect not merely royal preference but broader community judgment. Even more innovative is the creation of the Ephoret, an institution that provides annual oversight of royal activities while serving as advocates for citizen interests against potential royal abuse. The 5 ephors, elected annually by the Citizen Assembly, possess authority to monitor royal behavior, prosecute violations of traditional law, and even arrest kings who exceed their constitutional powers. This system creates accountability mechanisms unprecedented in the monarchical societies of the ancient world, establishing precedents that will influence Greek political development for centuries. Yet the Retra's political innovations represent only one aspect of the comprehensive transformation that tradition attributes to Lycurgian reform. The economic arrangements that the new constitution establishes prove equally revolutionary, addressing directly the inequalities that threaten to destroy citizen unity. The land redistribution that accompanies constitutional reform redistributes Spartan territory among citizens in equal portions, creating the material foundation for the political equality that the new institutions require. This redistribution affects not only Spartan citizens but the Helot populations whose labor makes the system possible. Each citizen receives an allocation of land sufficient to support his family, while providing the leisure necessary for military training and political participation. The Helots assigned to work these properties are required to deliver fixed portions of their agricultural production to their Spartan masters, creating economic relationships that free citizens from direct involvement in productive labor, while ensuring adequate support for their specialized military role. The creation of the kleros system, as these equal land allocations become known, represents more than economic reform. By eliminating the vast inequalities in wealth that had been developing among citizens, the redistribution removes major sources of internal conflict, while creating shared interests that strengthen community unity. Citizens who possess similar economic resources have similar stakes in maintaining the system that protects their property and privileges, reducing the likelihood of factional conflicts that might weaken military effectiveness. The educational reforms that accompany these political and economic changes lay the foundation for the systematic training that will become one of Sparta's most distinctive characteristics. While the detailed development of the agoge system belongs to later periods, the principles established during the Lycurgian era create the framework within which that system will evolve. The emphasis on communal rather than individual excellence, the subordination of family loyalty to state allegiance, the systematic cultivation of martial virtues at the expense of other cultural values, all these themes emerge during this crucial period of constitutional development. The transformation of Spartan social life extends beyond formal institutions to encompass the daily practices that shape citizen character and community identity. The establishment of the syssitia, the communal dining arrangements that require citizens to share meals rather than eating in private households, creates bonds of fellowship while demonstrating commitment to equality and mutual dependence. These institutions serve multiple purposes. They reinforce the unity that military effectiveness requires. They prevent the development of luxury and private excess that might undermine citizen equality, and they provide mechanisms for monitoring individual behavior and maintaining community standards. The rejection of luxury that becomes central to Spartan identity during this period reflects not ascetic philosophy but practical calculation about what kinds of behavior support or undermine the social arrangements that conquest has made necessary. The prohibition of gold and silver currency, the limitations on private construction and decoration, the restrictions on foreign travel and trade, all these measures serve to maintain the internal unity and external distinctiveness that Helot domination requires. The iron currency that replaces precious metal coinage symbolizes the broader transformation that Lycurgian reform represents. This cumbersome medium of exchange, unsuitable for international commerce and too bulky for accumulating personal wealth, ensures that Spartan citizens cannot easily engage in the kinds of economic activities that might create new forms of inequality or external dependence. The isolation that this system creates is not accidental but deliberate, designed to preserve the internal arrangements that military specialization requires. The religious dimensions of the Lycurgian transformation prove equally important in establishing the ideological foundation for the new order. The reforms receive divine sanction through consultation with the Delphic oracle, whose approval provides legitimacy that transcends human authority. Apollo's endorsement of the constitutional changes creates sacred obligations that bind future generations to maintain institutions that might otherwise be modified or abandoned when circumstances change. The oath that tradition associates with Lycurgus's departure from Sparta reveals the psychological foundation upon which the entire system rests. According to the traditional account, the lawgiver requires all citizens to swear that they will maintain his institutions unchanged until his return from a journey to consult the oracle. His subsequent decision never to return, effectively binding the Spartans to preserve his arrangements permanently, demonstrates the kind of absolute commitment that the system requires from all participants. This story, whether historically accurate or legendary embellishment, captures an essential truth about the society that emerges from the Lycurgian transformation. The arrangements established during this period are not presented as temporary expedients or experimental innovations, but as permanent solutions that reflect eternal principles of justice and effectiveness. The citizens who accept these institutions commit themselves and their descendants to maintaining them regardless of changing circumstances or alternative possibilities that may subsequently emerge. The success of the Lycurgan system in addressing the immediate crisis that had threatened Spartan society becomes apparent through the stability and military effectiveness that characterized the following centuries. The internal conflicts that had seemed likely to destroy citizen unity disappear as equality of condition creates shared interests among all participants in the system. The military specialization that the economic arrangements make possible produces tactical innovations and strategic capabilities that enable Sparta to dominate the Peloponnese, while maintaining internal security against Helot rebellion. Yet the very success of these arrangements creates new problems that will challenge future generations. The isolation that preserves internal unity also limits Spartan access to external developments in military technology, political organization, and cultural achievement. The equality that eliminates factional conflict also prevents the kind of individual excellence and innovation that drive progress in other societies. Most fundamentally, the system's dependence on Helot labor creates permanent vulnerabilities that no amount of military superiority can entirely eliminate. The constitutional arrangements established during this crucial period prove remarkably durable, surviving external pressures and internal challenges that destroy other Greek political systems. The Gerousia continues to provide wise counsel and institutional continuity across generations of changing leadership. The Ephorate maintains its role as guardian of citizen rights and check on royal ambition. The equal land allocations preserve economic foundation for political participation, while the Helot system provides the agricultural surplus that military specialization requires. As you contemplate this extraordinary period of institutional creativity, consider what the Lycurgan transformation reveals about the relationship between political arrangements and social character. The Spartans who emerge from this constitutional revolution are not merely the same people living under different laws, but fundamentally different kinds of human beings whose values, aspirations, and capabilities have been reshaped by the institutions that govern their daily lives. The lawgiver, whose name becomes synonymous with systematic reform, achieves something that few historical figures accomplish: the creation of a society that embodies a coherent vision of human excellence, while maintaining the practical arrangements necessary to realize that vision in concrete historical circumstances. Whether Lycurgus represents historical individual or legendary composite, the transformation attributed to his influence demonstrates what becomes possible when a community commits itself entirely to a comprehensive idea. The oath that supposedly binds the Spartans to preserve Lycurgan institutions until their creator's return creates one of history's most fascinating examples of self-imposed constraint. By voluntarily limiting their own future choices, the citizens of this revolutionary generation ensure that subsequent generations will inherit not merely political arrangements, but sacred obligations that transcend ordinary calculations of advantage and expedience. The sun sets over a transformed Laconia as the 7th century draws to a close, illuminating a society that has chosen to bind itself permanently to principles that most communities would consider impossibly demanding. The Spartans who will inherit this legacy face both unprecedented opportunities and inescapable limitations, as the very institutions that enable their greatness also constrain their capacity for adaptation and growth. The constitutional framework that emerges from the Lycurgan transformation provides the legal and political foundation for Spartan society. Yet laws alone cannot create the kinds of human beings that such a system requires. The institutions established in the 7th century represent only the beginning of a much deeper transformation, as the Spartans discover that maintaining their revolutionary arrangements demands nothing less than the systematic remaking of human nature itself. The generations that inherit Lycurgus' legacy face the challenge of translating constitutional principles into lived reality, creating educational and social practices that produce citizens capable of sustaining a society unlike any other in the ancient world. The agoge system that develops during the 6th and 5th centuries represents perhaps history's most comprehensive attempt to shape human character through systematic education. This institution, whose name derives from the Greek word for leading or guidance, encompasses far more than military training or academic instruction. It becomes a total environment designed to transform Spartan boys into the kinds of men their society needs. Warriors who value honor above life, citizens who subordinate individual desires to community needs, and guardians who can maintain perpetual vigilance against both external enemies and internal threats. The selection process that determines which children will participate in this extraordinary education begins at the moment of birth, revealing the ruthless calculation that underlies Spartan idealism. Every newborn male child faces examination by tribal elders, whose judgment determines not merely educational opportunity but survival itself. The infants who fail to meet physical standards, those judged too weak, malformed, or unlikely to develop into effective warriors, face exposure on the slopes of Mount Taygetus, where the elements accomplish what communal sentiment cannot bear to do directly. This practice, which shocks other Greeks and horrifies modern sensibilities, reflects the fundamental logic that governs all Spartan institutions. In a society where every citizen must be capable of military service, where the survival of the community depends on the effectiveness of its warriors, and where limited resources must be allocated with maximum efficiency, sentiment cannot be permitted to override practical necessity. The Spartans who make these terrible choices understand that the alternative to selective infanticide may be the destruction of their entire community through military defeat or helot rebellion. The boys who survive this initial selection enter the agoge at age 7, beginning a 20-year journey that will transform them from dependent children into full citizens capable of defending and perpetuating their remarkable society. The separation from family that marks this transition represents more than educational convenience. It symbolizes the subordination of private loyalty to public obligation that defines Spartan citizenship. The mothers who surrender their sons and the fathers who accept this separation demonstrate their commitment to values that transcend natural affection. The early years of agoge training from 7 to 12 focus on developing the physical capabilities and mental toughness that more advanced training will require. The boys, organized into groups under the supervision of older students and adult overseers, learn to endure hardship as a matter of course rather than as exceptional challenge. Their clothing remains minimal regardless of weather, their food insufficient to satisfy hunger, their sleeping arrangements designed to build endurance rather than provide comfort. These deprivations serve not as punishment but as preparation for the far greater hardships that military service will demand. The educational curriculum during these formative years emphasizes practical skills over abstract learning, physical development over intellectual sophistication. The boys learn to read and write, but only enough to handle the basic communications that citizenship requires. They study music and poetry, but only those forms that reinforce martial values and community loyalty. Mathematics receives attention primarily as it relates to military formations and logistics. The broader cultural education that characterizes other Greek communities is deliberately excluded as irrelevant to Spartan needs and potentially dangerous to Spartan values. The intermediate phase of agoge training, covering ages 12 to 18, introduces the competitive elements that will determine each boy's eventual position within the warrior hierarchy. The physical contests that mark this period test not only individual capability but the capacity for cooperation and leadership that military effectiveness requires. Boys compete as individuals in running, wrestling, and combat sports, yet they also participate in team activities that emphasize collective achievement over personal glory. The development of leadership skills receives particular attention during these crucial years, as the agoge system seeks to identify and cultivate the qualities that produce effective military commanders. Boys who demonstrate tactical intelligence, physical courage, and the ability to inspire confidence in their peers receive additional responsibilities and advanced training. Yet this selection process operates within carefully defined limits, ensuring that individual excellence serves community needs rather than personal ambition. The steeling that becomes an integral part of intermediate agoge training reveals the complex moral universe that Spartan education creates. Boys are expected to supplement their inadequate food rations through theft, yet they face severe punishment if caught in the act. This practice teaches multiple lessons simultaneously. Resourcefulness and cunning become survival skills, The ability to endure pain without revealing information proves essential for military service, and the distinction between acceptable and unacceptable behavior depends on context rather than abstract principles. The famous story of the boy who concealed a stolen fox beneath his cloak and allowed it to gnaw through his flesh rather than reveal his theft demonstrates the kind of character that this training produces. Whether historically accurate or legendary embellishment, the tale captures the extraordinary commitment to honor and endurance that the agoge system cultivates. Boys who learn to value reputation above comfort, community loyalty above personal safety, and success in assigned tasks above immediate pleasure develop into men capable of extraordinary military achievement. The final phase of agoge training, from 18 to 20, introduces the most demanding and morally ambiguous elements of Spartan education. The Krypteia, or secret service, requires selected young men to demonstrate their readiness for full citizenship by undertaking missions that test their courage, resourcefulness, and commitment to Spartan values. These assignments, which often involve surveillance and sometimes elimination of potentially dangerous helots, serve multiple purposes within the broader system of social control. The Krypteia functions as both advanced military training and systematic terrorism, teaching future warriors how to operate independently, while demonstrating to the helot population that Spartan surveillance extends everywhere, and that resistance carries deadly consequences. The young men who participate in these operations learn to kill without hesitation, to gather intelligence through patient observation, and to maintain absolute secrecy about their activities. These skills prove essential for the kind of warfare that Sparta's unique position requires, yet they also demonstrate the moral costs that military specialization demands. The graduation ceremony that marks completion of agoge training represents one of the most significant moments in any Spartan's life. The young men who have survived 20 years of systematic hardship and proven their worthiness through countless tests finally receive recognition as full citizens, entitled to participate in the political life of their community and eligible for the economic support that citizenship provides. Yet this achievement brings not relaxation but new responsibilities, as adult citizens must maintain their military effectiveness while contributing to the education of the next generation. The role of Spartan women in this educational system reveals another distinctive aspect of their society's approach to human development. Unlike their counterparts in other Greek communities, Spartan women receive systematic physical training designed to prepare them for their crucial role as mothers of warriors. They participate in athletic competitions, learn music and dance, and develop the intellectual capabilities necessary to manage household affairs while their husbands serve in military campaigns. The marriage customs that govern the transition from agoge completion to full adult responsibility reflect the systematic subordination of private desire to public necessity that characterizes all Spartan institutions. Young men do not choose wives based on personal attraction or romantic attachment, but rather accept assignments that serve the community's interest in producing the next generation of citizens. The elaborate rituals that surround these arrangements emphasize procreation and genetic quality over emotional satisfaction or individual preference. The syssitia, the communal dining arrangements that bind adult citizens together through shared meals and mutual obligation, extend the educational principles of the agoge into civilian life. The men who gather for these daily meals maintain the bonds of fellowship and mutual dependence that military service requires while continuing the process of character formation that began in childhood. The conversations that occur during these gatherings, the sharing of food and wine according to established customs, and the collective decision-making about membership and conduct all serve to reinforce the values and relationships that Spartan society needs. The economic arrangements that support this comprehensive educational system reveal the sophisticated calculation that underlies Spartan social organization. The helot labor that provides agricultural surplus makes possible the extended period of non-productive education that citizen children receive. The equal land allocations that support citizen families eliminate economic pressures that might interfere with educational requirements. The prohibition of commercial activities prevents the development of alternative sources of wealth that might create competing values or divided loyalties. As you contemplate this extraordinary educational achievement, consider what the agoge system reveals about human potential and the costs of realizing that potential through systematic cultivation. The Spartans who emerge from this process possess capabilities that seem almost superhuman to their contemporaries. physical endurance that enables them to march and fight under conditions that would incapacitate ordinary men, moral courage that allows them to face death without flinching, and social cohesion that creates tactical advantages no amount of individual skill can match. Yet this transformation comes at costs that extend far beyond the obvious sacrifices of comfort and individual freedom. The systematic elimination of traits that do not serve military purposes creates citizens who are magnificent warriors but limited human beings. The subordination of family loyalty to state allegiance weakens the emotional bonds that provide meaning and motivation for most people. The rejection of cultural activities that do not directly support martial values impoverishes intellectual and artistic life in ways that become apparent only when compared to the achievements of other Greek communities. The mothers who raise daughters according to Spartan principles, preparing them to surrender their sons to the agoge system and accept the possibility that those sons may die in battle, demonstrate a form of heroism that rarely receives the recognition it deserves. These women, who combine physical strength with emotional resilience, administrative capability with uncompromising loyalty to community values, represent one of the most remarkable achievements of Spartan social engineering. The completed agoge system, as it exists during the height of Spartan power in the 6th and 5th centuries, represents perhaps the most successful attempt in human history to create a society whose every institution serves a single, clearly defined purpose. The citizens who emerge from this comprehensive education possess not only military skills but the character traits necessary to maintain the system that produced them. Discipline that makes training a pleasure rather than a burden, loyalty that makes personal sacrifice seem natural rather than heroic, and wisdom that recognizes the tension between individual excellence and community survival. The sun rises over a society that has achieved something unprecedented in human experience. This despotic production of warriors whose capabilities transcend ordinary human limitations while remaining fully integrated into a political community that serves their highest aspirations. The young men who complete their agoge training and assume their places as full citizens inherit not merely privileges and responsibilities but participation in one of history's most extraordinary experiments in human excellence. The warriors who emerge from this extraordinary system of education and training represent the culmination of 2 centuries of systematic human development. Yet their true capabilities remain untested by the kind of overwhelming challenge that reveals the difference between theoretical excellence and practical achievement. The agoge has produced men whose discipline, courage, and tactical skill seem to transcend ordinary human limitations, but these qualities have been demonstrated only in regional conflicts against opponents who share similar cultural backgrounds and military traditions. The test that will either validate or expose the limitations of Spartan military supremacy approaches from the east, where forces are gathering that dwarf anything the Greek world has previously encountered. The crisis begins not with direct threat to Spartan territory but with events unfolding across the Aegean Sea, where Greek cities that had fallen under Persian dominance attempt to reclaim their independence through coordinated rebellion. The Ionian Revolt, erupting in 499 BC under the leadership of Aristagoras of Miletus, represents the first major challenge to Persian expansion westward, since Cyrus the Great had established the empire that now stretches from India to Egypt. The rebels who dare to defy the great king's authority understand that their success depends on securing support from the powerful city-states of mainland Greece, yet their appeals for assistance reveal fundamental divisions within the Greek world about how to respond to Persian power. The Spartan response to these desperate pleas for aid demonstrates both the strategic wisdom and moral limitations that characterize their approach to international relations. King Cleomenes I, after listening to Aristagoras' arguments for intervention, famously rejects the proposal upon learning that the Persian capital of Susa lies 3 months' march from the Aegean coast. This decision reflects not cowardice but calculation, as the Spartans recognize that their military system, designed for regional dominance and Helot control, cannot sustain the kind of extended overseas campaign that effective assistance would require. The isolation that has enabled Spartan development also constrains their strategic options when faced with threats that transcend the Peloponnesian world. Their economic system, dependent on Helot agricultural labor, cannot support the citizen soldiers during prolonged absence from their homeland. Their political arrangements based on citizen participation in governance require the physical presence of the warrior class. Most fundamentally, their social structure, built on constant vigilance against internal rebellion, makes extended external commitments potentially suicidal. Athens makes the opposite choice, committing 20 ships to support the Ionian cause despite understanding that such intervention will likely provoke Persian retaliation against mainland Greece. This decision, driven by democratic enthusiasm and commercial interests rather than strategic calculation, achieves temporary success when Athenian forces participate in the burning of Sardis, the Persian provincial capital. Yet this victory proves Pyrrhic, as it identifies Athens as a primary enemy in Persian planning, while failing to provide the sustained support necessary for permanent Ionian independence. The collapse of the Ionian revolt in 49 before BC, culminating in the destruction of Miletus and the enslavement of its population, demonstrates both Persian determination and the consequences of challenging imperial power without adequate preparation. The refugees who flee westward carry with them not only personal tragedy, but strategic intelligence about Persian military capabilities that will prove crucial for mainland Greek planning. Their accounts of Persian numbers, tactics, and logistical capabilities provide the first reliable information about the empire that now turns its attention toward the subjugation of European Greece. The Persian expedition that arrives at Marathon in 490 BC represents more than punitive raid against Athenian intervention in Asia Minor. Darius I's decision to launch a direct assault on mainland Greece reflects imperial ambition that envisions Persian dominance extending across the entire Aegean world. The forces that land on the beaches of Attica, though substantial by Greek standards, constitute only the advance guard of what the great king intends as a systematic conquest that will bring European civilization under Persian rule. The Athenian appeal for Spartan assistance before the Battle of Marathon reveals both the reputation that Spartan warriors have already established and the practical limitations that constrain their deployment. The famous runner Philippides, whose journey from Athens to Sparta becomes legendary for its speed and endurance, carries with him not merely a request for military support, but recognition that Spartan participation might determine the outcome of the most important battle yet fought on European soil. The Spartan response to this appeal demonstrates how religious obligation can override strategic necessity when political will exists to find solutions. The Carneia, the sacred festival that supposedly prevents Spartan military activity during this crucial period, provides convenient justification for delay that serves multiple purposes. The religious prohibition allows the Spartans to avoid committing their limited forces to a battle whose outcome remains uncertain while preserving their reputation for piety and lawful behavior. Yet the promise to march after the festival's completion maintains the possibility of intervention should circumstances change. The Athenian victory at Marathon, achieved without Spartan participation, transforms the strategic situation throughout Greece, while revealing both the potential and limitations of citizen soldier armies when properly led and motivated. The news that reaches Sparta in the aftermath of battle, that 10,000 Athenians and their Plataean allies have defeated a Persian force perhaps twice their size, provides evidence that Greek military methods can succeed against imperial opponents when courage combines with tactical innovation. The Spartan force that finally arrives at Marathon after the battle discovers a transformed political landscape in which Athens has achieved the kind of military reputation that previously belonged exclusively to Sparta. The examination of Persian dead that the Spartans conduct, studying the equipment and formations of their potential enemies, reveals professional interest in tactical developments that will influence their own military planning. Yet their praise for Athenian achievement cannot entirely conceal awareness that the balance of prestige within Greece has shifted in ways that may affect future relationships. The decade of preparation that follows Marathon witnesses intensive activity throughout Greece as communities prepare for the larger Persian invasion that everyone expects. The intelligence gathered from prisoners and deserters, combined with diplomatic contacts maintained through various channels, provides increasingly detailed information about the massive preparations underway in Persian territories. The reports reaching Greece describe military forces and logistical arrangements that dwarf anything previously imagined, suggesting that the next Persian assault will seek not merely punishment of specific cities, but complete subjugation of European civilization. Xerxes I, ascending the Persian throne after his father's death, inherits not only an empire, but an obligation to complete the conquest that Marathon had interrupted. His decision to lead personally the largest military expedition in ancient history reflects both imperial pride and strategic calculation about what will be required to overwhelm Greek resistance. The forces he assembles, drawing contingents from across the known world, represent the mobilization of imperial resources on a scale that transforms the coming conflict from regional war into clash of civilizations. The Persian advance into Europe, marked by the construction of bridges across the Hellespont and the cutting of a canal through the Athos Peninsula, announces imperial intentions through engineering achievements that demonstrate both technological capability and unlimited determination. These massive projects, requiring the labor of hundreds of thousands of workers over months of intensive effort, serve strategic purposes while creating psychological effects designed to convince potential opponents that resistance is futile. The Greek response to these overwhelming preparations reveals both the potential for cooperation and the persistent divisions that characterize their political relationships. The Congress that meets at Corinth to coordinate resistance represents unprecedented collaboration among traditionally independent communities, yet the decisions reached reflect compromises that satisfy no one completely, while addressing the minimal requirements for effective defense. The debate over strategy that dominates these discussions exposes fundamental differences in how various Greek communities assess their chances against Persian invasion. The Athenian proposal to meet the enemy at sea, exploiting Greek naval superiority in confined waters, conflicts with Spartan preference for land-based defense that capitalizes on their infantry advantages. Theban reluctance to commit fully to resistance reflects both geographic vulnerability and calculations about the likely outcome of conflict between Greek city-states and the world's largest empire. The selection of Leonidas to command the advance force at Thermopylae demonstrates Spartan recognition that the coming battle requires not merely military competence, but the kind of moral authority that can inspire maximum effort from troops who understand they face overwhelming odds. The Spartan king who accepts this assignment possesses not only the tactical knowledge that agoge training provides, but the philosophical understanding necessary to transform military necessity into heroic choice. The decision to defend the pass at Thermopylae, despite awareness that the position cannot be held indefinitely against determined assault, reflects strategic calculation that transcends immediate tactical considerations. The narrow terrain that channels Persian numerical superiority into frontal attacks against disciplined Greek infantry provides the best available opportunity to demonstrate that imperial forces can be defeated by smaller numbers of properly trained and motivated defenders. More importantly, the psychological impact of successful resistance, even if temporary, might inspire broader Greek cooperation while revealing Persian vulnerabilities. The 300 Spartans who accompany Leonidas to this appointment with destiny represent more than military elite. They embody the culmination of everything their society has attempted to achieve through 2 centuries of systematic human development. These men, selected not only for their physical capabilities, but for their possession of adult sons who can continue their family lines, understand that they march toward death in service of principles that transcend individual survival. The conversations that allegedly occur between Spartans and their allies during the march to Thermopylae reveal the psychological preparation that enables such extraordinary commitment. When warned that Persian arrows will darken the sky, the Spartan Dinakes reportedly responds with pleasure that they will therefore fight in the shade. This exchange, whether historically accurate or literary embellishment, captures the transformation of natural fear into anticipation of glorious achievement that represents the highest accomplishment of Spartan education. The battle itself unfolds over 3 days of increasingly desperate combat as Persian forces attempt to break through Greek defenses that channel their numerical advantage into manageable encounters between small numbers of highly trained opponents. The initial assaults, employing standard imperial tactics that had conquered most of the known world, achieve nothing against defenders whose discipline enables them to maintain formation under pressures that would shatter ordinary troops. The commitment of the immortal Xerxes' elite infantry, whose reputation rivaled that of the Spartans themselves, to the second day's assault demonstrates Persian recognition that conventional forces cannot overcome the tactical advantages that Greek training and terrain provide. Yet even these picked troops, selected from throughout the empire and equipped with the finest weapons available, cannot break formations maintained by men whose entire lives have prepared them for exactly this kind of encounter. The tactical innovation that finally breaks the deadlock comes not through superior fighting, but through geographical knowledge. As a local guide leads Persian forces along mountain paths that circumvent the Greek position, the discovery that they have been outflanked forces the Greek allies to confront the choice between retreat that might preserve their forces for future battles, or final stand that can serve no practical purpose beyond demonstrating their commitment to resistance. The decision by most allied contingents to withdraw while the Spartans remain to fight to the death reflects not cowardice, but realistic assessment of how limited Greek resources can best serve the broader cause of resistance. The Thebans and the Spartans who choose to stay demonstrate that Spartan courage can inspire similar commitment in others, while the departing troops carry with them the responsibility of ensuring that the sacrifice achieves its intended purpose of rallying continued Greek resistance. The final assault that overwhelms the remaining defenders transforms military defeat into moral victory, as the manner of Spartan death validates everything their society has claimed about the relationship between proper education and heroic achievement. Leonidas and his men fighting with spears until the weapons break, then with swords until the blades shatter, finally using hands and teeth against enemies who can kill them but cannot make them yield, demonstrates standards of courage that inspire admiration even among their opponents. The Persian treatment of Leonidas's body, decapitating and crucifying the Spartan king in violation of normal practices regarding enemy commanders, reveals the psychological impact that Spartan resistance has achieved. Xerxes' order to dishonor the dead king reflects not merely anger at military delay, but recognition that the moral authority demonstrated through such extraordinary sacrifice poses threats to imperial prestige that transcend immediate tactical consideration. The year of campaign that follows Thermopylae witnesses the gradual transformation of initial Persian advantages into strategic disadvantage as Greek resistance, inspired by Spartan example, proves more resilient than imperial planners had anticipated. The destruction of Athens while fulfilling Persian promises of retaliation fails to break Greek morale as expected. Instead, the sight of their greatest city in flames strengthens Greek determination to continue resistance regardless of costs. The naval victory at Salamis, achieved primarily through Athenian courage and tactical innovation, demonstrates that Thermopylae's moral impact extends beyond land warfare to influence all aspects of Greek military effort. The Persian fleet that enters the straits confident of easy victory encounters enemies whose determination to fight to the death, learned from Spartan example, enables tactical achievements that superior numbers should have prevented. The campaign's culmination at Plataea provides Spartan infantry with the opportunity to validate their reputation in the kind of open battle that their training had been designed to dominate. The Persian forces that face them on the plains of Boeotia encounter not merely individual warriors of exceptional skill, but a military system whose every element serves the single purpose of achieving maximum effectiveness in heavy infantry combat. The Spartan charge that breaks Persian resistance at Plataea represents more than tactical success. It demonstrates the practical application of educational principles that had been developing for centuries, the disciplined advance that maintains formation despite enemy pressure, the coordinated spearwork that maximizes individual contributions to collective effort, and the relentless pursuit that prevents enemy recovery, all reflect training methods whose effectiveness receives final validation through decisive victory. As you contemplate this extraordinary demonstration of human potential realized through systematic cultivation, consider what the Persian wars reveal about the relationship between individual excellence and collective achievement. The Spartans who die at Thermopylae and triumph at Plataea represent not merely exceptional individuals but products of social arrangements that enable ordinary human material to achieve extraordinary results through proper education and institutional support. The reputation that Sparta earns during these crucial years transcends military accomplishment to encompass moral authority that will influence Greek politics for generations. The city-state that had seemed merely regional power proves itself capable of producing warriors whose courage inspires allies while commanding respect from enemies. The example they provide transforms abstract ideals about honor and sacrifice into concrete demonstrations that such values can guide practical action even under the most extreme circumstances. The victory that Greece achieves over the Persian Empire establishes Spartan military supremacy as unquestioned fact while creating new challenges that will test their society's capacity for adaptation and growth. The world that emerges from these conflicts offers opportunities and temptations that the isolated society of earlier centuries had never faced, requiring decisions about how to employ their enhanced reputation while maintaining the internal arrangements that made their achievements possible. The victory over Persia that establishes Spartan military reputation as unassailable fact simultaneously creates conditions that will test their society more severely than any external enemy ever could. The world that emerges from the Persian Wars offers unprecedented opportunities for Greek expansion and influence, yet it also generates tensions between former allies whose cooperation had been forged by common danger rather than shared values. The Spartans who return from Plataea to their mountain valley find themselves confronting choices that will determine not only their own future but the fate of Greek civilization itself. The immediate aftermath of Persian defeat reveals fundamental differences in how the victorious Greek powers envision their relationship with the wider world. Athens, energized by naval success and democratic enthusiasm, pursues aggressive expansion that transforms the Delian League from defensive alliance into maritime empire. The tribute that flows into Athenian treasuries from subject cities, the colonies that extend Athenian influence across the Mediterranean, and the cultural achievements that Periclean wealth makes possible create a civilization whose dynamism and ambition seem to offer unlimited possibilities for human achievement. Sparta, by contrast, withdraws into the isolation that had enabled their distinctive development, viewing Athenian expansion with suspicion that gradually hardens into implacable hostility. The Helot system that provides the foundation for Spartan military excellence cannot support sustained overseas commitments, while the constitutional arrangements that govern their society require citizen participation that extended absence would disrupt. More fundamentally, the values that define Spartan identity, discipline, moderation, respect for traditional authority, appear increasingly threatened by Athenian innovations that challenge established patterns throughout the Greek world. The growing rivalry between these incompatible systems manifests initially through proxy conflicts, as each power seeks to expand its influence without direct confrontation. The Athenian support for democratic movements throughout Greece encounters Spartan backing for oligarchic governments that promise to maintain traditional arrangements. These interventions, justified by both sides as defensive measures necessary to protect allied interests, gradually create a bipolar system in which neutrality becomes impossible and every local dispute risks escalating into broader conflict. The crisis that finally triggers open warfare emerges from the complex relationships surrounding Corinth, Sparta's most important ally, whose commercial interests increasingly conflict with Athenian expansion. The Athenian alliance with Corcyra, a naval power whose fleet could tip the balance in any future conflict, threatens Corinthian dominance in western waters, while providing Athens with strategic advantages that could prove decisive in extended warfare. The subsequent Athenian siege of Potidæa, a Corinthian colony that rebels against imperial control, forces Sparta to choose between supporting their ally and avoiding the general war that such support will certainly provoke. The debate that occurs in the Spartan assembly during the summer of 43-2 BC reveals the internal tensions that Athenian expansion has created within traditionally conservative Spartan society. King Archidamus II, whose name will become associated with the first phase of the coming conflict, argues for caution and diplomatic resolution, understanding that prolonged warfare will strain Spartan resources while offering uncertain prospects for decisive victory. His speech, preserved by Thucydides, demonstrates sophisticated appreciation for the logistical challenges that any campaign against Athenian naval power will present. The Ephors Sthenelaidas, speaking for those who favor immediate action, appeals to Spartan honor and traditional obligations rather than strategic calculation. His argument that delay will be interpreted as weakness throughout Greece, potentially encouraging Athenian aggression while undermining confidence in Spartan protection, reflects genuine concerns about how reputation affects power relationships in the anarchic world of interstate politics. The Assembly's vote for war, delivered not through formal debate but through spatial division that visually demonstrates overwhelming support for confrontation, commits Sparta to a conflict whose ultimate consequences no one can foresee. The Archidamian War that begins in 43-1 BC unfolds according to strategies that reflect each power's distinctive capabilities and limitations. The Spartan approach, based on annual invasions of Attica designed to destroy agricultural resources while forcing decisive battle, assumes that Athenian resolve will crack under economic pressure combined with the psychological strain of watching their territory systematically devastated. This strategy, logical given Spartan military advantages and understanding of agricultural societies, fails to account for the unprecedented circumstances created by Athenian naval empire and democratic determination. The Athenian response, abandoning their countryside to concentrate population behind the long walls while using naval superiority to raid Spartan territory, represents strategic innovation that exploits their unique advantages while avoiding the kind of land battle where Spartan tactical superiority would prove decisive. Pericles' famous funeral oration, delivered after the first year's casualties, articulates the ideological foundation that enables this strategy, presenting democratic values and imperial achievements as worth any sacrifice necessary to preserve them. The plague that strikes Athens during the second year of war demonstrates how unforeseen circumstances can undermine even the most carefully planned strategies. The overcrowding that results from rural population concentrating within the city walls creates ideal conditions for epidemic disease, while the psychological impact of watching Pericles himself succumb to illness undermines confidence in the leadership that had promised certain victory. The Spartan decision to avoid Attica during the plague years reveals both humanitarian sentiment and tactical wisdom, as they recognize that nature accomplishes their strategic objectives more effectively than military force. The emergence of Cleon, as Athens' dominant political figure after Pericles' death, transforms the character of Athenian strategy in ways that ultimately favor Spartan interests. The more aggressive approach that Cleon advocates, seeking decisive military victory rather than gradual exhaustion of enemy resources, leads to overextensions that create opportunities for Spartan tactical advantages to influence strategic outcomes. The Athenian capture of Spartans at Sphacteria, while achieving temporary diplomatic leverage, encourages precisely the kind of aggressive overconfidence that Spartan strategy aims to provoke. The Spartan response to the Sphacteria humiliation reveals both the flexibility and limitations of their military system. The appointment of Brasidas to command operations in Thrace demonstrates their capacity for strategic innovation when circumstances require adaptation, while his success in detaching Athenian allies shows how Spartan reputation can achieve political objectives that pure military force cannot accomplish. The death of both Brasidas and Cleon during the fighting around Amphipolis removes the most aggressive leaders from both sides, creating opportunities for the moderate voices that seek negotiated settlement. The Peace of Nicias, concluded in 4021 BC after 10 years of inconclusive warfare, represents recognition by both powers that their strategies had reached stalemate rather than genuine resolution of the underlying conflicts that had caused the war. The complex territorial exchanges that the treaty mandates prove impossible to implement fully, while the fundamental rivalry between Athenian expansion and Spartan conservatism remains unaddressed. More dangerously, the peace fails to include several important allies whose continued fighting ensures that the broader conflict will resume regardless of formal agreements between the principal powers. The Athenian decision to launch the Sicilian expedition in 415 BC represents the kind of strategic overextension that Spartan leaders had hoped their attrition strategy would eventually provoke. The forces that Alcibiades and Nicias lead westward constitute the largest military commitment in Athenian history, reflecting democratic enthusiasm for expansion that transcends rational calculation of costs and benefits. The expedition's objectives, conquering Syracuse, controlling Sicily, potentially extending operations to southern Italy and beyond, reveal ambitions that would strain any power's resources while creating new enemies throughout the western Mediterranean. The initial Spartan response to Athenian involvement in Sicily demonstrates the strategic patience that their military culture cultivates. Rather than immediately resuming large-scale operations against Attica, they provide limited assistance to Syracuse while carefully observing how Athenian resources become committed to distant operations. The advice of Alcibiades, who defects to Sparta after being recalled to face religious charges, provides intelligence about Athenian capabilities and intentions that proves invaluable for planning future operations. The decision to establish a permanent fort at Decelia, following Alcibiades' recommendations, transforms the strategic situation more effectively than any previous Spartan initiative. The year-round pressure that this installation creates, forcing Athens to maintain constant vigilance while preventing normal agricultural activities throughout Attica, achieves the economic strangulation that seasonal invasions had failed to accomplish. The defection of thousands of Athenian slaves to this secure base further weakens enemy capabilities, while demonstrating that Spartan strategy can adapt to exploit opportunities that extended warfare creates. The catastrophic failure of the Sicilian expedition, culminating in the destruction of the entire Athenian force and the deaths of both commanding generals, provides Sparta with strategic opportunities that their traditional military methods could never have achieved. The news reaching Greece in 413 BC reveals that Athens has lost not merely a campaign, but the core of its military capability, while the psychological impact of such complete defeat encourages widespread rebellion throughout the Athenian Empire. The final phase of the war witnesses fundamental changes in Spartan strategy as they adapt to exploit Athenian vulnerabilities that the Sicilian disaster has exposed. The decision to seek Persian financial support, while compromising the Greek independence that the Persian wars had established, reflects realistic assessment that Athenian naval power cannot be overcome without resources that Sparta alone cannot provide. The acceptance of Persian demands regarding Ionian Greek cities demonstrates how strategic necessity can override ideological consistency when survival and victory require such choices. Lysander's emergence as the architect of final Spartan victory represents both the potential and dangers of individual excellence within their collective system. His diplomatic skills in securing Persian support, his tactical innovations in naval warfare, and his political acumen in managing complex alliance relationships demonstrate capabilities that traditional Spartan education had not been designed to produce. Yet his personal ambitions and authoritarian methods also reveal how success can undermine the institutional constraints that maintain internal balance. The naval campaigns that Lysander conducts in the Eastern Aegean demonstrate how Spartan military virtues can achieve success in unfamiliar environments when properly adapted and adequately supported. The victory at Notium, followed by the more decisive triumph at Agoge, establishes Spartan naval supremacy for the first time in their history while destroying the maritime foundation of Athenian power. The capture of virtually the entire Athenian fleet, achieved through tactical surprise that exploits enemy overconfidence, represents one of the most complete naval victories in ancient warfare. The siege of Athens that follows Agoge reduces the proud democracy to desperate straits as starvation forces consideration of surrender. Terms that would have seemed unthinkable during the confident years of Periclean leadership. The debate within Spartan councils about how to treat their defeated enemies reveals tensions between traditional moderation and the harsh realities that total victory creates. The decision to spare Athens from destruction, while dismantling the empire and installing oligarchic government, reflects both magnanimity and calculation about how to manage post-war relationships. The symbolic destruction of the long walls that had enabled Athenian resistance, accomplished to musical accompaniment that celebrates the restoration of Greek freedom, marks the end of an era in which competing visions of civilization had contended for supremacy. The Spartans who oversee this ceremony can justly claim that their traditional values and military excellence have triumphed over the democratic innovations and imperial ambitions that had threatened to transform the Greek world beyond recognition. As you contemplate this extraordinary achievement, consider what the Peloponnesian War reveals about the relationship between military capability and political success. The Spartans demonstrate that disciplined patience, strategic adaptation, and willingness to accept Persian support when necessary can overcome seemingly insurmountable advantages in resources and technology. Their victory validates not only their military system, but their broader approach to social organization, proving that traditional values properly maintained can prevail against revolutionary innovations. Yet the very completeness of Spartan success creates new challenges that will test their society's capacity for managing the responsibilities that victory brings. The position of supremacy that they have achieved throughout the Greek world offers opportunities for expansion and influence that their traditional institutions were never designed to handle. The temptations that accompany total victory over their greatest rivals may prove more dangerous to Spartan society than any military defeat could have been. The sun sets over a Greek world transformed by 27 years of warfare that has established Spartan hegemony while destroying the confidence in human progress that Athenian achievements had seemed to promise. The warriors who return to their mountain valley carry with them not only the satisfaction of victory but the burden of determining how to use the power they have gained through such extraordinary sacrifice and determination. The warriors who return to the valleys of Laconia in the spring of 404 BC find themselves masters of a Greek world that has never known such concentrated power in the hands of a single city-state. The empire that Athens had built through naval supremacy and democratic energy now acknowledges Spartan authority, while the network of alliances that had sustained Athenian resistance lies in ruins. Yet this unprecedented success brings with it challenges that no amount of agoge training could have anticipated, as the Spartans discover that governing an empire requires capabilities entirely different from those needed to achieve military victory. The installation of the 30 tyrants in Athens represents the first great test of how Spartan values will adapt to the realities of imperial administration. Lysander's decision to support this oligarchic government, composed of Athenian aristocrats sympathetic to Spartan political principles, reflects logical extension of the ideological consistency that had motivated Spartan resistance to Athenian democracy. Yet the reign of terror that follows demonstrates how quickly the pursuit of political objectives can deteriorate into personal vengeance and systematic oppression that violates even Spartan standards of honorable conduct. The transformation of Critias and his colleagues from political reformers into murderous tyrants reveals the corrupting influence that unlimited power exercises over human character. The executions that eliminate democratic leaders, the confiscations that enrich oligarchic supporters, and the climate of fear that paralyzes ordinary citizens create conditions that offend the Spartan sense of justice, while undermining the stability that effective governance requires. The appeal of Thrasybulus and the democratic exiles for sanctuary demonstrates how Spartan actions, intended to promote order and traditional values, instead generate chaos and moral compromise. The brief civil war that restores Athenian democracy in 403 BC forces Sparta to confront the limitations of ruling through local proxies, whose legitimacy depends entirely on external support. King Pausanias's decision to negotiate a settlement that permits democratic restoration, while diplomatically prudent, reveals the gap between Spartan political theory and the practical requirements of managing complex urban societies. The amnesty that ends the conflict provides a model for civilized resolution of internal disputes. Yet it also demonstrates Spartan inability to maintain the kind of systematic control that imperial dominance requires. The expedition of Cyrus the Younger against his brother Artaxerxes provides Sparta with opportunities to extend their influence into regions previously dominated by Persian power. The decision to support Cyrus's rebellion while officially maintaining peace with the Persian Empire reflects the strategic thinking that had characterized Spartan diplomacy during the final phase of the Peloponnesian War. The hope that a grateful Cyrus might grant Sparta permanent control over the Ionian cities justifies risks that earlier generations would have avoided as incompatible with traditional isolationism. The Battle of Cunaxa, which destroys Cyrus's ambitions while stranding 10,000 Greek mercenaries deep in Persian territory, creates a crisis that tests Spartan capacity for long-range strategic planning. The famous retreat that Xenophon chronicles, while primarily an Athenian achievement, occurs under nominal Spartan authority that obliges them to consider how such adventures affect their broader relationships with both Persian and Greek powers. The survival of the 10,000 demonstrates Greek military superiority in foreign environments, yet their ordeal also reveals the dangers of imperial overextension. The Asian campaigns of King Agesilaus represent the most ambitious attempt to translate Spartan military excellence into permanent territorial expansion beyond the traditional boundaries of Greek civilization. The decision to invade Asia Minor in 3096 BC reflects confidence that the tactical superiority demonstrated at Plataea can achieve strategic objectives that previous Greek expeditions had failed to accomplish. Agesilaus's personal combination of military skill with political acumen suggests that individual Spartan excellence can adapt to challenges that collective institutions cannot easily address. The initial successes that Agesilaus achieves against Persian forces validate Spartan confidence in their military system, while revealing opportunities for expansion that could transform their society's economic foundation. The liberation of Greek cities from Persian control, the collection of tribute from grateful populations, and the recruitment of local allies create possibilities for permanent presence in regions whose wealth could support Spartan military activities indefinitely. Yet these achievements also demonstrate how imperial expansion generates demands for administrative capabilities that traditional Spartan education does not provide. The Corinthian War that erupts in 3095 BC forces Sparta to defend their homeland while maintaining overseas commitments that stretch their limited manpower beyond sustainable limits. The coalition that Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos form against Spartan dominance receives Persian financial support that enables extended resistance to what had seemed unassailable military supremacy. The irony that Persia now supports Greek independence against Spartan imperialism reveals how quickly international relationships can reverse when strategic calculations change. The recall of Agesilaus from his Asian victories to deal with the domestic crisis demonstrates how Spartan society's fundamental limitations constrain their imperial potential. The citizen soldiers whose excellence enables tactical supremacy cannot be divided indefinitely between overseas adventures and homeland defense without compromising both objectives. The Helot system that provides agricultural foundation for military specialization cannot support extended absence of the entire warrior class without risking internal rebellion that could destroy everything Spartan society has achieved. The Battle of Coronea, where Agesilaus defeats the coalition forces threatening Spartan territory, represents both military triumph and strategic failure. The tactical excellence that enables Spartan heavy infantry to overcome numerically superior enemies validates their training methods and traditional confidence. Yet the necessity of abandoning Asian conquest to defend the Peloponnese reveals that their society lacks the demographic and economic resources necessary to maintain permanent expansion beyond their traditional sphere of influence. The King's Peace of 3087 BC, imposed through Persian mediation that grants autonomy to Greek cities while confirming Persian control over Asia Minor, represents the greatest diplomatic achievement in Spartan history, while simultaneously revealing the moral compromises that imperial success requires. The treaty that Antalcidas negotiates provides Sparta with security against further coalition warfare while recognizing their hegemony over mainland Greece. Yet the acceptance of Persian authority over Greeks whom previous generations had died to liberate demonstrates how the pursuit of practical advantage can override ideological consistency. The systematic dissolution of political federations that follows the King's Peace reveals how Spartan interpretation of autonomy serves their hegemonic interests, rather than genuine respect for local independence. The breaking up of the Boeotian League, the Chalcidic Confederation, and other regional associations eliminates potential centers of resistance, while creating smaller political units that individual Spartan intervention can more easily control. This policy achieves short-term security objectives while generating resentment that will ultimately strengthen opposition to Spartan dominance. The occupation of the Theban Cadmea in 3082 BC represents the most flagrant violation of Greek political norms since the Persian Wars, as Spartan forces seize control of their allies' citadel during peacetime negotiations. The decision to support oligarchy coup through direct military intervention demonstrates how imperial responsibilities corrupt traditional Spartan respect for legal processes and diplomatic propriety. The outrage that this action provokes throughout Greece reveals that their reputation for honor and lawful behavior, carefully cultivated over centuries, can be destroyed through single acts of unprincipled aggression. The internal problems that develop within Spartan society during this period of external dominance reflect contradictions that success has created rather than resolved. The wealth that flows from tribute and plunder enables some citizens to live more luxuriously than previous generations, creating inequalities that threaten the solidarity essential for military effectiveness. The oliganthropia or population decline that becomes apparent during these decades reveals demographic trends that may ultimately prove more dangerous than any external enemy. The emergence of Thebes as the center of resistance to Spartan hegemony demonstrates how oppression can create the very opposition that it seeks to prevent. The liberation of the Cadmea by Theban exiles trained in guerrilla warfare, followed by the systematic development of military innovations that challenge Spartan tactical supremacy, reveals that political resistance can evolve into military capability when properly organized and led. Epaminondas and Pelopidas, the Theban leaders who emerged during this period, represent a new generation of Greek military thinkers whose innovations will transform the nature of ancient warfare. The sacred band that Thebes creates during these years of resistance represents conscious adaptation of Spartan military principles to serve different political objectives. The elite unit of paired lovers whose bonds provide motivation that transcends ordinary military discipline demonstrates that other Greek communities can match Spartan dedication when properly motivated. The training methods that produce tactical excellence comparable to Spartan achievement suggest that their military supremacy may depend more on social arrangements than inherent superiority. As you contemplate this period of unprecedented Spartan power and growing internal strain, consider what their brief hegemony reveals about the relationship between military excellence and political success. The Spartans demonstrate that superior tactics and discipline can achieve victories that establish regional dominance, yet they also discover that maintaining such dominance requires capabilities that their specialized society cannot easily provide. The very qualities that enable their rise to supremacy, isolation, conservatism, demographic limitation, prove to be obstacles to the administrative flexibility and population growth that imperial success demands. The corruption that imperial responsibilities introduce into Spartan society extends beyond individual moral compromise to encompass institutional changes that threaten the foundations of their traditional system. The wealth that some citizens accumulate through overseas service, the political connections that develop through diplomatic activities, and the exposure to alternative value systems that imperial administration requires all contribute to pressures that could ultimately transform Spartan society beyond recognition. The stage is set for challenges that will test whether the society that has achieved military supremacy through centuries of systematic development can adapt to the realities of imperial governance, while preserving the essential characteristics that made their achievements possible. The enemies gathering beyond their borders possess not only military capability but moral authority that comes from resisting oppression, creating conditions that will determine whether Spartan excellence can evolve or whether its very perfection has made adaptation impossible. The enemies gathering beyond Spartan borders during the final years of their hegemony possess something more dangerous than superior numbers or innovative tactics. They carry with them the moral authority that comes from resisting oppression, combined with military knowledge gained through decades of studying Spartan methods. The Thebans who prepare for the decisive confrontation that will determine the future of Greek political relationships have learned not only how to match Spartan discipline and courage, but how to pass them through tactical innovations that transform the fundamental nature of ancient warfare. The collision that approaches will reveal whether the society that has achieved perfection in one form of military excellence can adapt when confronted by evolution that renders their methods obsolete. The army that marches from Sparta toward Leuctra in the summer of 3071 BC represents the culmination of nearly 4 centuries of systematic military development. These warriors, trained from childhood in the agoge system and proven through decades of successful campaigns, embody everything their society has attempted to achieve through the sacrifice of individual comfort and cultural breadth. King Cleombrotus I, leading this expedition to reassert Spartan authority over rebellious Thebes, commands forces whose tactical superiority has never been successfully challenged by Greek opponents in direct confrontation. Yet the Spartans who advance across the plains of Boeotia toward their appointment with destiny carry with them not only the accumulated wisdom of their military tradition but also the limitations that perfection in one area creates. Their tactical formations, refined through generations of successful application, have become so standardized that innovative opponents can predict their deployment and prepare countermeasures. Their social system, designed to produce warriors of unmatched individual excellence, has created demographic constraints that limit their ability to replace casualties sustained in extended campaigns. The Theban army that awaits them represents something unprecedented in Greek military history. A force that combines systematic study of Spartan methods with innovations that exploit the very consistency that has made those methods successful. Epaminondas, the Theban commander whose tactical genius will reshape ancient warfare, understands that defeating the Spartans requires not merely matching their courage and discipline, but creating circumstances where those qualities cannot compensate for numerical and positional disadvantages. The tactical innovation that Epaminondas employs at Leuctra, the oblique formation that concentrates maximum force against the Spartan right wing while refusing battle elsewhere, demonstrates how military science can evolve to counter even the most perfectly developed traditional methods. The deepened phalanx that he creates, 50 ranks instead of the usual 8, generates impact that overwhelms Spartan resistance through sheer mass, while preventing the individual excellence of Spartan warriors from influencing the battle's outcome. The shock of defeat that follows represents more than military reverse. It constitutes psychological catastrophe that undermines the fundamental assumptions upon which Spartan society rests. The news that King Cleombrotus has died and the Spartan phalanx has broken spreads throughout Greece with the speed of disbelief, as communities that have acknowledged Spartan supremacy for over 3 decades struggle to comprehend that the seemingly invincible warriors have finally met their match. The immediate consequences of Leuctra extend far beyond the battlefield to encompass the entire foundation of Spartan power. The Helotarch rising that erupts throughout Messenia demonstrates how military defeat can trigger internal rebellion when oppressed populations recognize that their masters are not invincible. The loss of control over the territories that have provided agricultural surplus for 4 centuries eliminates the economic foundation that has enabled Spartan military specialization while reducing their effective territory to the original boundaries of Laconia. The liberation of Messenia under Theban auspices represents more than territorial loss. It destroys the demographic balance that has sustained Spartan society since the original conquest. The Helotu have provided agricultural labor while being excluded from political participation suddenly become citizens of an independent state, while the Spartans who have depended on their labor face the necessity of supporting themselves through methods their education has not prepared them to employ. The foundation of Megalopolis as a federal capital for Arcadian independence demonstrates how Spartan defeat encourages broader resistance to their traditional domination throughout the Peloponnese. The coalition of previously subject peoples, supported by Theban military intervention, creates power structures that permanently alter the strategic balance while establishing precedents for cooperation that could exclude Spartan influence entirely. The demographic crisis that becomes apparent during this period reveals problems that extend beyond immediate military and territorial losses to encompass the fundamental sustainability of Spartan social arrangements. The oliganthropia that observers note, the visible decline in the number of full citizens capable of military service, reflects trends that have been developing for generations but now threaten to reduce Sparta to insignificance regardless of external pressures. The causes of this population decline include both the selective pressures of constant warfare and the internal contradictions of the Spartan social system. The agoge training that produces superior warriors also eliminates many potential citizens through its demanding requirements. The economic arrangements that support military specialization depend on maintaining precise ratios between citizens, perioeci, and helots that become impossible to sustain when any element of the system fails. The attempts at military revival that successive Spartan leaders undertake during the following decades demonstrate both the persistence of their traditional values and the impossibility of restoring their former position through familiar methods. Kings like Agilus II and Cleomenes III seek to address demographic decline through various expedients, recruiting perioeci as citizens, accepting foreign volunteers, reducing property qualifications for citizenship. Yet none of these measures can restore the social cohesion that had made Spartan excellence possible. The intervention of Macedonian power in Greek affairs during the mid-4th century provides Sparta with opportunities to recover some independence through resistance to external domination. The refusal to participate in Philip II's Corinthian League, while maintaining nominal autonomy, reduces Sparta to the status of regional holdout against forces that have transformed the entire Mediterranean world. Alexander the Great's dismissive comment that one Athenian victory would be more than all Spartan achievements reflects how completely their reputation has declined. The social reforms that Agis IV and Cleomenes III attempt during the 3rd century represent desperate efforts to address internal problems through return to supposedly original Spartan principles. The land redistribution, debt cancellation, and educational reforms that these revolutionary kings propose recognize that demographic decline and economic inequality have undermined the foundations of traditional Spartan society. Yet their deaths at the hands of conservative opposition demonstrate how difficult change becomes when vested interests defend arrangements that no longer serve their original purposes. The final intervention of Macedonian forces, followed by Roman involvement in Greek affairs, reduces Sparta to the status of minor player in conflicts whose outcomes are determined by powers whose resources and ambitions transcend anything the Greek world can muster. The defeat of the last independent Spartan king at the hands of Roman forces in 1950 BC eliminates the final remnant of political autonomy while transforming Sparta from active participant in Mediterranean politics into historical curiosity preserved for its educational value. The Sparta that survives under Roman rule bears little resemblance to the society that had once dominated Greek military affairs. The agoge system continues in modified form, yet it serves primarily to entertain Roman tourists rather than produce warriors capable of meaningful military service. The traditional ceremonies persist, but they commemorate past greatness rather than prepare for future challenges. The physical remains of Spartan institutions become museum pieces that preserve memories of achievements whose practical relevance has permanently disappeared. As you contemplate this extraordinary decline from unprecedented power to provincial insignificance, consider what the Spartan experience reveals about the relationship between specialization and adaptability. The society that achieved perfection in one form of human excellence discovered that such perfection could become a prison when circumstances required different responses. The very qualities that had enabled their rise, discipline, conservatism, systematic training, proved to be obstacles when survival demanded innovation and flexibility. The price of their achievement extends beyond military defeat to encompass the fundamental tragedy of a people who had sacrificed everything to excel in one area, only to discover that excellence without adaptability leads inevitably to obsolescence. The Spartans who had trained themselves to be perfect warriors found that the world no longer needed the kind of perfection they could provide, while their specialization had eliminated their capacity to offer anything else. The museum pieces that Sparta becomes under Roman rule might suggest that their extraordinary experiment in human excellence died with their political independence, yet the deeper currents of their influence continue to flow through Western consciousness, long after the last citizen soldier has laid down his spear. The physical remnants of their society, the ruins of their agoge training grounds, the fragments of their austere poetry, the archaeological traces of their simple dwellings, tell only part of a story whose true significance transcends the rise and fall of any single political entity. The Spartan legacy lives not in monuments or territories, but in the eternal questions they pose about the nature of human excellence and the price that such excellence demands. The admiration that later civilizations express for Spartan achievements reveals humanity's persistent fascination with societies that dare to pursue absolute ideals regardless of personal cost. The Roman writers who preserve their memory, the Renaissance scholars who study their institutions, the modern historians who analyze their methods, all struggle to understand how human beings could willingly embrace arrangements that subordinate individual desires so completely to collective purposes. The Spartans become a mirror in which other societies examine their own choices, measuring their commitments against the standard of those who literally chose death before dishonor. Yet this admiration carries within it the seeds of criticism that grows stronger as human values evolve toward greater emphasis on individual rights and personal fulfillment. The Helot system that enabled Spartan military excellence appears increasingly horrific as moral consciousness develops more sophisticated understanding of human dignity and political justice. The infanticide that eliminated the weak, the educational brutality that hardened the strong, the cultural narrowness that prevented broader human development, all these aspects of Spartan society challenge modern sensibilities, while forcing confrontation with uncomfortable questions about what achievements might require such sacrifices. The political philosophers who invoke Spartan examples in support of various ideologies demonstrate how their legacy can serve contradictory purposes depending on which aspects receive emphasis. The totalitarian movements that claim Spartan inspiration focus on state supremacy and individual submission, while democratic theorists admire their constitutional innovations and citizen equality. The military establishments that study their methods seek tactical lessons, while educational reformers examine their systematic approach to character formation. Each interpretation captures genuine elements of Spartan achievement, while ignoring aspects that complicate simple appropriation of their example. The enduring power of Spartan symbolism reflects deeper truths about human nature and social organization that transcend specific historical circumstances. Their society poses fundamental questions that every civilization must answer. What is the proper relationship between individual freedom and collective security? How much comfort and convenience should be sacrificed for excellence and achievement? When does the pursuit of perfection become destructive of the very humanity it seeks to elevate? What responsibilities do the strong bear toward the weak, and what obligations do communities have to their most vulnerable members? The Spartans who answered these questions through the creation of their extraordinary society continue to challenge succeeding generations to examine their own choices with similar rigor and commitment. The warriors who died at Thermopylae defending principles they valued more than life itself demonstrate possibilities for human dedication that inspire even those who reject their specific values. The mothers who raised sons according to Spartan ideals, knowing those sons might die in battle, exemplify forms of strength that transcend physical courage to encompass moral and emotional heroism of the highest order. Yet their legacy also serves as warning about the dangers of pursuing any ideal without sufficient attention to its human costs. The society that achieved military perfection through systematic subordination of all other values reveals how excellence in one area can blind communities to deficiencies in others. The Spartans who created the most effective warrior culture in ancient history also created a society incapable of adaptation, innovation, or the kind of cultural development that enables civilizations to contribute lasting achievements beyond military conquest. The questions they raise about education remain particularly relevant in any age that seeks to shape human character through systematic training. Their demonstration that intensive, prolonged, and carefully structured experiences can produce individuals whose capabilities far exceed normal human limitations continues to influence educational theory and practice. Yet, their example also reveals how such training can narrow rather than broaden human potential when it serves exclusively utilitarian purposes rather than genuine human flourishing. As you drift toward final contemplation of this remarkable civilization, consider what the complete Spartan story reveals about the eternal tension between individual excellence and collective achievement. They created human beings of extraordinary capability through social arrangements that demanded extraordinary sacrifice, proving that the highest forms of achievement require willingness to pay prices that most communities find unacceptable. Their legacy challenges every society to examine whether their own arrangements produce the kinds of human beings their ideals require, while warning of the costs that such production might demand. The sun sets one final time over the valley where this extraordinary experiment in human excellence began, illuminating ruins that speak of vanished glory while shadows that carry eternal significance. The Spartans have returned to the earth that shaped them, yet their questions remain alive, challenging each new generation to determine what they will sacrifice for their highest aspirations and what they will preserve of their humanity in pursuit of their dreams. The warrior's dawn that began this story has become the warrior's twilight, yet the light they kindled continues to burn in human memory, neither fully admired nor completely condemned, but forever challenging those who encounter their legacy to examine the depth of their own commitments and the price they are willing to pay for the excellence they claim to value. In this eternal questioning lies their true immortality, not in bronze or marble but in the restless human spirit that never ceases to wonder what might be possible if ordinary people chose to become extraordinary regardless of cost.